Did you recognize what Jonathan was playing during that time? Did you recognize it? I got a light in my face today, so I can't really see. You're going to have to speak loud. Yes, you recognized it. The old rugged cross. The choir's even going to sing it for us this morning. And this morning I'm wondering what thoughts and emotions that hymn stirs up for you, if any. Think about it for a moment. Is the tune what's beloved? Is it the words that you cling to? Perhaps neither. I'll be really honest, I can take it or leave it. It doesn't really much matter to me. It's not a song that resonates for me one way or the other. And some people say, oh, it's generational. Well, I have a 90-year-old, almost 90-year-old, beloved United Methodist person in my life who, you ask her what that song means to her, and she kind of goes, whatever. Why does that song stir up emotions for some? Perhaps it takes you back to a certain place. Perhaps it takes you back to a certain person or group of people. As I have talked to people about this hymn over the last week, I've wondered, is it actually the hymn itself, or is the belovedness the connection to wherever it is that it takes you? Or can you even distinguish between the two anymore? I've been thinking about this hymn this week because it's the first of our CrossWords for our Lenten series is nostalgia. And I was asking people at first service and asking them, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear that tune? And almost to a person, at least the first 6 people that spoke all said a funeral. Well, there you go. It's Lent. Death is a part of that. We got the cross front and center. That kind of makes sense. And for the last couple of weeks, I've been sitting with this word, nostalgia, and I've been using, and I know many of you have as well, this little book by David White called Consolations, and he says this about nostalgia. Nostalgia is something we thought we understood, but that we are only now about to understand. Nostalgia is something we thought we understood, but we are only now about to understand. I don't know about you, but sometimes once I get a little distance from things, I can be a bit more objective about how I remember them. For example, many of you know I went for the first 2 years of my college experience to a small private liberal arts school with a conservative Christian heritage. And after my sophomore year, I left. Somewhat suddenly and unexpectedly to many. And for many, many years, I could tell you exactly why I left. And I could tell you all the emotions that were tied up with that, emotions that I was deeply, deeply attached to for many, many years. Almost 25 years, to be exact. I was clinging to an old story that I'd been telling myself for 25 years when I realized that story wasn't true. All the emotions that I thought I had remembered were clouding my remembering of what actually happened for 25 years, I thought I understood about myself and about that college and the experience I had had there, but only last fall was I finally able to reach back into my past and free myself from that old story. And it has been one of the most healing acts of my life. Getting real with myself in an objective way was so important for me. As David White says, my past was newly remembered in a way that allowed me to come to terms with what actually occurred. Breaking through old structures and stories that were weighing really heavy on me and no longer served my future self. But I had to come to a certain realization that that was a bunch of old dead stuff that I need to offer up and leave behind. Our wonderful Grace brought these sticks this week, and she was carrying them in a big bundle, and Reverend Ryan saw her come in, and he said, well, look at that. And she goes, yes, it's a whole lot of dead stuff that is no longer in my yard. Yeah. Some of us keep a lot of dead stuff in our yards of our hearts, holding on to it so very tightly. Dead stuff. Anybody ever had a facial? Have a facial? Yes. Oh, you had one the other day. Yeah. And what'd she say to you? She said, dead stuff on your face. 3 weeks of dead stuff. She washed right off her face. I had 25 years of that stuff weighing me down. Lord of mercy. Maybe you're better than me. Maybe you've seen your therapist more regularly than I have, and you aren't carrying around any old stuff. Maybe all the stories you tell yourself are absolutely true. I'm glad to have lunch with you this week. You know, when you read the stories of Jesus, it seems to me that Jesus, time and again, asks the community to be really honest about whether the stories they're telling themselves are true. He challenges people to rethink their stories in a way that helps to serve them in this place and in this time. You know, Jesus didn't start out to start a new religion, right? He didn't set out to begin Christianity. No. He was trying to work within the stories of his own life to, as to quote David White again, to bring about the first annunciation that the past as they knew it was coming to an end. Jesus says, are the stories you're telling yourself true? You know, all the times when he's healing demons, that's part of what he's doing. What are you carrying on to that's weighing so heavy that it makes you sick, holds you back, keeps you from moving into the future? We do it as individuals, we do it as communities. And one of my girlfriends wrote an article last year called Nostalgia May Kill Us. She grew up in a Kentucky coal town. She fancies herself to be Loretta Lynn. In a place where the mine, once the center of the thriving community, is now closed, has been for many years. And she explains how the old story of being a coal town and being coal people no longer was life-giving. And it was holding them back from living into the future. But recently, the community decided to lay aside that old story of, well, the mine is dead, what are we to do? And so they decided to live into a new future and tell a new story. And so they built a park. They kept, for nostalgia's sake, as she writes, the smokestacks or whatever those things are. I don't really know. I didn't grow up in Loretta Lynn country. She's got the accent to prove it, though. But I'll post her article to Facebook later today. But they built this park on top of, as she says, the old pit that was the center of our story. And she says about this very picture that it offers a powerful image of the resurrection that can happen when the old story is allowed to die. They kept, just to remind you, the old structures while transforming everything else around it into something new and life-giving. And that's what Lent gives us the opportunity to do, to create something new and life-giving by laying down our old stuff. And the only way we begin to heal our communities and our cities and our world, the only way we heal that is if we start healing ourselves first. And so over the next 6 weeks, our worship time is really going to be less about our communal life together as we've talked for the last 5 or 6 weeks. Ryan and Suzanne and I are really going to challenge you to look inside. Anybody given anything up for Lent? That's like the traditional thing people try to figure out what they need to give up. Anybody given anything up? Anybody? Anybody? What you giving up for Lent? Sweets. God bless you. What you giving up? Ooh, now we're talking. That goes with complaining over here. What you giving up? Bread. Woo! It's like, no, can't do that either. You gonna pick those sweets back up on Easter? Maybe. Probably. Choir, as long as you're not giving up singing, I don't care what you give up. Each and every week during this Lenten season, we're going to ask you to give something up around one of these words, this week being nostalgia. Maybe if you're giving up sweets and Coke or bread or whatever, many of you will pick that back up on Easter Sunday, but what we want to do here is really, what stuff are you carrying? Because for the love of God, don't carry it around for 25 years. I cried for 3 days when I finally let some of that stuff go. What do you need to give up and leave behind? Really leave behind and hang on the cross so that the love of God might transform your stuff in a new way. You know, the song that the choir is going to sing for us here in a minute says that the cross was once a symbol of suffering and shame. And that's true. But the love of God transformed that symbol of suffering and shame and made it into a symbol of life and hope and healing. And if we lay our stuff on that cross, God promises the same for us. God does not promise it will be easy. God doesn't say it won't be messy. And God doesn't give us God's time frame. That's the part I really struggle with. If God could just let me know how long that was going to take, like if I'd have known it was going to take 25 years to get rid of some of that stuff, maybe I'd have worked harder at it. The Lenten season is a time for breaking out of all the old routines. You're going to write your prayer of the stuff you need to leave behind on the broken pieces of our communion table. But in that brokenness, we say, God, we're willing to walk through these days that, as Reverend Sue said, reminds us of the 40 days that Jesus spent in the wilderness, grounding himself in prayer and self-reflection, so that at the end of that time, he might be more aligned with what God was calling him to do and who God was calling him to be. So what do you need to hang on this cross this morning? What old story from your past do you need to hang on the cross with the prayer that God will transform it for you? What dead stuff are you clinging to that's keeping you from opening your hands up to all that God is trying to give you? From God's hand leading you into that future. But you can't grab it because you're clinging so tight to this old dead stuff. It's scary stuff. I just told you I cried for 3 days. We put it front and center. Not hidden back there where we could cover it up with lots of stuff. It's going to hang front and center every week for the next 6 weeks. You got to look through it to get to the table. Churches like ours don't do that very often. Because it reminds us that it's hard work. It's hard work. But the promise of Easter is life. The promise of Easter, the promise of the gospel is that the old rugged cross is a promise of life and hope and love. And that no matter what, the love of God can transform anything. And that is our hope for the next 6 weeks. That is the hope of our life as followers of Jesus. May that be our hope during this Lenten season.